Hi, my name is Mike Panyon, and I've been practicing the martial arts for almost 50 years, since 1974. First in Shotokan Karate under Mr. Oshima, and then later in the historical European martial arts. In fact, at the time of this podcast, I will be turning 70. This marks a new era for me, and in celebration of this, I wanted to create a podcast on practicing in the martial arts. It seems like practice for me is constantly changing, both as I age and as the culture changes alongside me. For the most part, I find that the changes are exciting and stimulating, even those changes that inevitably come with getting old. So I want to talk about this, about aging in the martial arts, with some peers who are also getting up there, Ellis Amdur and Maija Soderholm. Ellis is a martial arts practitioner and an instructor, a writer, and he works as a crisis intervention trainer. He's written a number of books on the martial arts and on crisis intervention, and he has also written some fiction. His martial arts books include Dueling with O-Sensei, Old School, Essays on Japanese Martial Tradition, and Hidden in Plain Sight, Esoteric Power Training Within Japanese Martial Traditions. Maija has been a good friend and a colleague for a number of years. We first met through a mutual interest in the doings of the Dog Brothers. She is a lineage holder in the Visayan-style Eskrima of Sunny Umpad. She is also an authorized teacher of Bagua in the Yizong system through Liu Dezhu. Maija has authored 2 books on tactics, and I believe she's working on a third. The first is called The Hustler, Swordplay and the Art of Tactical Thinking, and the second one is called Liar, the Cheat, and the Thief, Deception and the Art of Swordplay. I hope you find this discussion to be interesting. This is my first attempt at trying to have a discussion that I might want to put on online as a podcast. So the title of this is The Fifth Level, Aging in the Martial Arts. I chose that as a title because in my education as a martial artist, there was a 5th level. It was the highest level that our group talked about. And it was it was basically the stage of older age. And there was not a lot of direction given about what that was going to be like. And it occurred to me when I was thinking about getting older that and still practicing that there is really no direction after you get to a certain point, because everybody that's ahead of us kind of dies. So I thought it'd be fun to try to talk to people about this. I've heard a lot of young people talking about what old people should be doing when they're practicing. So some of it's funny, and some of it reminds me of things that I used to think. So the first, I have questions. So to get the conversation going. So do you have in your training or in your traditions how you were learned to be a martial artist, some kind of stages of development, in life development, that you went by or that you followed?
Go for it, Ellis.
Well, let me ask you what you mean by stages of development first.
Okay, so I can probably most easily explain that by briefly talking about what my training had. In my group, the levels of black belt were corresponded to stages of development. I think they were derived from Buddhist and Shinto ideas. And the first was getting your feet on the ground, getting an understanding of fundamentals, an inkling of it. And the second was a stage of fearlessness and zealousness. The third stage was marked by an increase in intuition and self-control. The fourth stage was marked by an expanded ability to influence people. So instead of it being just having self-control over myself, you started to be able to influence groups of people. So things like being an instructor, or being the kind of person who can kind of be quietly assert something and everybody kind of listens. That kind of mentality, care for community, care for family. And then the last stage was spirituality. And the only thing that we were told was, this is a door, and you approach the door and open it. And there you are. So there's no guidance other than that in terms of what that is. And in terms of the practical aspects of that level, when you were tested for that, they tested for understanding of vital areas, and resuscitation techniques, and health-oriented stuff, alongside practices that were more subtle. So an example of the sparring practice for that level is what they called EI, which is very close range one attack sparring. So you're standing pretty close to each other, and one of you tries to hit the other one, and the other one blocks and counters. That's what I was taught. As far as I can tell, aspects of that are what I have gone through over my life. So how about you?
Yeah, okay. So just one question out of curiosity. So what was your tradition?
Shotokan karate, but through Mr. Oshima and and to some extent his respected seniors, included Senior Agami and Kamata Watanabe and some other guys like that. So
okay. So I've put off answering long enough, right? So the two traditions that I'm licensed in are rooted in the 1600s, although, it's unclear if, what was practiced in the 1600s. Okay. So if I start from them, there's ranking system, so to speak, or a certification system. And the one, Arakiryu, has Kirigami, Mokoroku, and then Inkajo, and Zegoku Menkyo. So you start with the fact that in many schools, Inkajo is the highest rank, and that's a Buddhist-derived term for sort of enlightenment. Kirigami means cut paper. And all it means is that you received a portion of the curriculum, and like a scroll is metaphorically cut, and you're handed it. And when you get the rest of the curriculum, they glue the two pieces together. Right? Mokoroku means that you've learned the whole tradition, all the techniques of the tradition. And then Inkajo and Zegoku are usually handed together, two ranks in one, although they don't have to be. And there's teachings that go along with it. Some people think they're spiritual teachings because at the highest level, there's a use of Shingon Buddhist iconography, symbology. But that's a mistake. It's not spiritual in any sense that we conceive of it. It's hacking the nervous system to be more effective as a fighter. So I explained it in brief one time. I say, it's like going into a church, you're in a fight, and you grab the crucifix off the wall and you bludgeon people with the crucifix. So from a spiritual perspective, to take these incredible esoteric Buddhist traditions and use them tactically to master other people, it could be considered a debasement from a Buddhist perspective. Now, then the other school, which is called Tenshin Bukoryu, you've got Shoden, which basically means first step, Chuden, middle step, Okuden, deep step, and then you've got Daimokoroku, which is the greater compendium. And so with all that, it sounds like there's some standardization, but there isn't. For example, I sent one of my students to Japan to practice with the current Soke. And the rank I gave him was Chuden. The Soke, or headmaster, actually Soke, that's complicated. Soke Daidi, he's the stand-in for the Soke because we don't have one right now. He said, I would make him Okuden right now. And my response was, as far as I'm concerned, he's about halfway through the Chuden level, which is not, it's like each of us teachers are independent to judge the level of attainment. And for me, it's gut. Like the way that Oshima Sensei et al. Codified things, I honestly never think of things that way. It's just, I feel it, right? And, when you get to the highest level, it's like, for me, it's just, okay, I could walk away. They have at least heard everything I know about this system to date. Doesn't mean I might continue to improve, but they've got it all. So in theory, if I die or get kidnapped by the aliens or whatever, everything that I've taught has been passed on. There's been a data dump, and it's up to them. They have everything they need to know to go beyond that. I just have to say that there's sometimes a few little oral teachings which might say be a good person or something like that, but neither of those traditions really focused on that. It was, the one tradition's got a preamble, which is this country of Japan has allowed itself to degenerate, and through the sword of the great god of Kashima, we are reviving ourselves to take our place as the premier country in the world, right? So there's that kind of imperialistic ideology. But so gods are mentioned, gods are vehicles, but there isn't a layer of what we conventionally call spirituality. So
okay, cool.
Yeah.
What's your take on this, Maija?
Well, of course, mine is completely different because I do not come from a traditional background. And though I've been given permission to teach like the Izong Bagua through Lodosho, I'll focus mostly on the Filipino stuff because it's such a great contrast to what you guys are doing. So I'm the lineage holder technically in the system. So I have a responsibility to pass it on. But it's such a different way of thinking in that nothing is codified. I learned from Sonny Umpard, and Sonny Umpard was born in post-World War II Cebu in the Philippines. So all his teachers were people that had lived through the war and fought through the war. So it was very real and very lively, shall we say, in the community. And I learned old school. So at the time, there was clubs in the Philippines that got together. There was the Balintawak Club and the Dos Pares Club. And these were just guys that knew each other that formed a martial art club that then became schools and have now become much more codified, which I think they probably got from the Japanese, I'm assuming, because traditionally it was all backyard style. It was family style. It was, go learn with your uncle over there, and the curriculum, it really was not really a curriculum as such. What you were being allowed to do was sit in while somebody did their thing, and you could, they allowed you to see how they fought and what they knew. So you picked up, tricks and tips and weapon manipulation stuff, and mostly you learned by interaction, by sparring. And so they would, Sonny's story is that you go when you're, young kid, and they gave you a rattan stick, and they had one, and they basically beat you until you learned how to defend yourself. And if you had that warrior spirit that you were all right and you didn't like run away, then I guess they kept teaching you more stuff, because it was like, well, you need to learn this. I like you, or we have a family connection. And so I will show you what I do. And Sonny was very keen on that idea that he says, I'm actually not teaching you, I'm showing you what I do. And then after a while, it's up to you to take it and make it yours. So the only real graduation you get, as far, like I said, I came from this old school tradition, and Sonny, even though he moved to the US, taught that same way, was there's no rankings. And the system basically looked at how often he could hit you. And the less he could hit you, the better you were getting, ultimately. And then, of course, he passed away in 2006. So on some level, he needed to say, yeah, these people know what I know. You know, these are the people that I say have more stuff as opposed to people who think they do. And so I happen to be on one of those. But it doesn't really mean, like, there's no, there's no sense. It's like I sat next to him and I learned about a bunch of stuff from him and I got better. Does that make sense? So now there's an implication that I'm meant to share, that it's not dead. I wasn't meant to like take it and keep it, but that it's a living tradition, that it's mine. But for instance, if you look at Filipino martial arts, there's so many names for all the different systems because it was assumed that your graduation would be that you then left your teacher and then named your own system. You didn't do his stuff. That was him. Like if you screwed up and fought somebody and lost, it wasn't his fault. You sat next to him and he was really good, but that was it. It was done after you were out. So there's nowhere to go, if you like. There's no graduation apart from that you take responsibility and say, this is what I learned, and if somebody wants it from me, I'll share it. So there's no plan. As far as I can see, all you do is you kind of get older and more ornery and drink and smoke yourself to death, and then you're gone. And then people write stories about you.
My next question was, what do the old people do in your experience? Like people who were your seniors, when they got to be as old as or older than you, what did they do?
Well, my teacher died younger than me. I'm now 2 years older than my teacher when he died. So if we talk about the really old men, Kakoy Kinete is still alive, and him and Sonny played together back in the Philippines. Like he's an old man. There's a bunch of brothers, the Cañete brothers, and he's still around. And as far as I can tell, Illustricio was the same. He lived into his late 80s. They have a lot of girlfriends. They drink a lot, and they gamble, and all the people that want their stuff pay them money. You know what I mean? And they keep doing that until they die. I think they're fairly entertained with this modern take of things where they don't have to fight people anymore, like get challenged. Because that's the big thing too, right? In the Filipino culture, they hate each other. They're always challenging each other. There's a lot of friction between the teachers. So I think maybe the only thing that happens is after a certain age, you don't get stepped to quite as much.
How about in your traditions or your experience, Ellis? What do these people do?
Let me. I need to interject a parenthesis just because it's so fun. You know how every one of us has the roads not taken in our career?
Yeah.
Like, I'm a young man. My kung fu teacher up in New Haven, Connecticut, walked off with the dojo money. And so I went down to the headquarters. I'm like 23 years old. I'm going to go down to Alan Lee's headquarters in New York City. It's 1973. And for some reason, I decided to walk from Christopher Street to 36th Street, which is 33 blocks. I don't know why I didn't take the subway. It's like 90-degree New York weather. I get tired. At 18th Street, I turned, and there's the New York Aikikai. I walked in. I was right for a conversion. And so, Japanese martial arts, Aikido. And that's cool. I've had a wonderful life. If I had turned on 23rd Street, I would have walked into Mestre Loramil's Capoeira school, and I would have ended up in Brazil and had a completely different life there, but for 5 blocks. So we got the roads not taken. I've got one that goes back a generation. So my father was born in 1910. And when he was a little boy of 6 or 7 years old, they had a Filipino gardener. And this Filipino gardener liked my dad and started to teach him how to throw knives. And then he would demonstrate how he could slip behind a sapling of a tree and somehow blend in and not be seen.
Excellent.
Right? And so my father threw so many knives into the garage door that it kind of fell apart. And I think that's when think I lost his job. But I sit there and think, Jesus, if my dad had acted right, he could have been the first American to learn a Filipino martial art, and he could have passed it to me.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, anyway, sorry for the tangent, but it's such I just thought of. What was the question again?
What do the old people do in your experience?
Well, this is an interesting thing. Let's see if I can make this brief, which is hard for me. So until very recently, the Kodyu, the archaic martial arts, were very sectarian. You were with your own group, and there were not so many challenge fights or anything like that, although they still existed. But for the most part, there were these self-contained entities. And the West hit Japan like a ton of bricks, not in terms of conquering, because Japan's response was, we got to rise up, take whatever we can from the West so they can't take us over, and somehow maintain our Japaneseness in the process. So they became, this imperialist power and all of that. One of the things they did is they started throwing out all the old things. And a lot of Kodyu disappeared in this period. This would be like the 1890s, 1900s. But there was a revival, and one reason was the emperor's physician, Erwan Bales, the German, started training in one of the old sword schools. And this was so cool to the Japanese that a foreigner would like this, that it rekindled an interest in things they were throwing away. He also expressed interest in jujitsu, and that was what gave a boost to what later became judo. So really, it's a German who's responsible for the first revival of Japanese martial arts. Then what happened is Japan becomes nationalist, and the remaining arts started to be used as a way to inculcate a certain spirit in everybody in Japan to become warriors of imperialism, right, in one way or another. And so then they started making these preservation societies, these organizations which brought all these schools together to demonstrate, which was a new phenomenon. They didn't used to demonstrate together. They didn't used to, they said even then they didn't practice together. But in a sense, they were kind of enemies is too strong, but rivals, right? So then the role of the old teacher got conflated with elderliness meant venerability, spiritual attainment. There's that sort of Confucian idea the past is better than the present. This kind of Taoist iconography of sennin, these, old masters. And so the old guy was better than the young guy because of Japan's social structure. Young people would consciously or often unconsciously collude with the old guy or gal when they're doing this thing and make them look good, and wouldn't even know that they were, sort of dancing together. It wasn't really contending together. And so the old people didn't retire for the most part. They, and I've seen people who were fully in the throes of Alzheimer being trotted up for a national embu, and there's a young person waiting in attendance where they trying to put their sword back in their sheath in the reverse direction, and the curve doesn't fit, and they're just looking puzzled why it's not going back, and you think, oh my God, they're going to cut off their hand. And it is lovely that Japan is tolerant of that and doesn't begin laughing at that person, right, as would happen in the West. But the old people, in a lot of these schools, end up squatting on top. They don't leave. And what also starts happening is younger people imitate the movements of elderly people because they're the master. Some teachers have the right idea, and I hope I'm one of them, which is the lineage that you have is a kind of a burden. The burden was given to you when somebody was kind enough to teach you. They didn't have to. They sacrificed hours. They sacrificed hours for an irritating person, and they didn't hold back. And if somebody was willing to alter their life for me, then I, or somebody like me, incurs a debt to do the same. But the goal is, in my mind, how quickly and effectively can I transmit everything? And that doesn't mean, sort of throw it on somebody who doesn't merit it. People have to merit it. But I'm not going to hold anything back. I don't want to be that old guy that people are going, oh God, there's Ellis's story number 32, yet again, right? So,
Yeah.
Oh God, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one, I had a question about what you were saying about the Japanese kind of rediscovering their sort of traditions. I also heard that because the Japanese won the Russo-Japanese War, that at the time they were using these Western sabers, and then they decided they were really stupid, and so then they went back to their katanas, and so they suddenly started to believe again in their, their technology, if you like, their ways of doing things. If that was true, if you heard that.
Actually, they were using Western mounted katana in the Russo-Japanese War.
Yeah.
So there's some famous legend of a guy charging the Russian ranks and cutting through a machine gun barrel with the sword. Legend, I'm sure, but who knows? But there was a brief period in the 1800s where it was so westernized that they were using French bayonet style, and they were using Western sabers. And then there was a realization that, what we've got, bastardized or what, isn't good enough. And then they started incorporating Japanese spear technique into the bayonet. And then they shifted to these military swords, but they were katana, which had a Western mounting. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Thank you. Yeah. I was going to just say as a counterpoint, I think, and I'm curious too to get both of your guys' opinions on this. Because of the Second World War and the Philippines, I mean, that's not long ago. It's my parents' generation. Do you know what I mean? Like it's for our age, right? It's the Second World War is now 80 years ago, but it doesn't feel like it's like ancient history, at least for me. Is that the old men of that generation who went through World War II, they were mean. Do you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of black marketeering, there was a lot of hustling, there was a lot of crime. A lot of these guys were enforcers, or they were somehow associated with the underworld in some way. Cebu's a port city. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in port cities, for instance, right? So there's trying to keep control of people. It's the same in Shanghai and all over the world, I'm sure, at that point, is that you've got the guys who are trying to keep order, and then you've got the criminals, doing their thing and their protection rackets and, keeping order in their own way. And so these old men, everybody was terrified of them. It's like they would wheel them out, and these old men had a real like nasty sense of humor too. They didn't have systems. These young guys are like, show me what you do, and they'll like fight me. So the young people's job was to get the information out of the old guy, who was obviously some like real badass, but he couldn't teach anything. He was just like, well, let's go and, pick up what I do, Do you know what I'm saying? So there was this sort of interesting phase, I think, when the older generation were dangerous, and how they taught and who they were is very different, perhaps nowadays, when somebody gets a rank just because of age or whatever, and they don't necessarily have that.
What age might they have been at that point?
It really varies, I think. The Filipinos seem to have two things. They either live to be really old, or they die of some stroke, probably from getting hit on the head too many times with sticks, in their 50s, right? It's kind of like one or the other. Is that they die young, or they kind of live to be sort of pretty old.
So this is, I think that, now I'm wondering about the age. The age matters in that, because if at that era, people who had been through World War II, they would have been maybe in their 50s, right? Not venerable yet, but not ancient, not venerable, but having been battle hardened perhaps, and then walked into real life and utilized some of the things that they learned at that point. So would you agree with that, or do you think that they were older?
I don't know. I mean, even if you look at all the people that emigrated here to the US, I mean, from as early as the 30s, 20s and 30s, I mean, they came as agricultural workers, but they were all mean old dudes, because they were immigrants and, they were kind of fighting against the man in a lot of ways. They had to keep their community safe from, racism and stuff like that. So it's just that they really were at it a lot with each other and fighting other people. And so this relationship with the elders of those kind of people at that generation, I'm sort of curious, because it's a slightly different relationship when there's this old man who's done who the hell knows what, but nobody's really talking.
It's bringing into the conversation the topic of how the culture may have been changing alongside with us getting older. It was rougher when I was a kid, at least where I lived, and where. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, Maija, but Ellis and I grew up about 20 miles away from each other.
No, really? No, I didn't know that. That's funny.
That was one of the things that I learned pretty quickly when we started talking years ago. So what you brought up, Ellis, is what I have euphemistically called the myth of Yoda. Like, is the myth of Yoda real? The guy that walks onto the scene with a cane, and then somehow, I don't know, a wash of ki floods through him, and he beats everybody up, and then when he's done, he bends over and picks up the cane and walks off. Do you think that guy was real?
Yeah, kind of, sort of, maybe, slightly. So, I have an acquaintance named Bob Galini, friend, and he's also the Izung lineage through Alan Pittman.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob has had some kind of congenital rheumatoid arthritis. He walked with a cane, hobbled. He would get in the circle, he'd put down the cane, he'd do his bagua brilliantly, and then he'd finish, and his knees would literally start to bend as he was walking out of the circle. And I can give myself, I don't know if credit, but use myself as an example. I just finished 2 knee surgeries a couple of years ago, got 2 partial knee replacements, and I had 3 wonderful months. And then some long-term spinal injuries have kicked in the last year and a half, and it's been getting progressively worse. I got what's called stenosis, and I've got spondylolisthesis. I've got a vertebrae that's out of place, and it's pressing on the nerve, and it hurts like. The only time it doesn't hurt is when I'm doing Arakido, and or something, because Arakido uses a more anthropoid posture, and when I'm in a more of a crouch, there's no pain. It's when I'm upright. So yeah, I recently, I don't know if it's gonna be my last, I taught a seminar with 4-foot stick on the East Coast. And literally walking from the car to the dojo, I'm thinking, I really feel like quitting right now. I feel like just canceling. I was hurting so bad. And I got on the mat, and it's like booted up the program, so to speak. And I did a whole day, and so was the baddest guy in the room. But then, I literally wanted to take one of the sticks from the dojo to get back to the car. So I think there is one aspect of this where if you have ingrained a movement in you, a set of movements, and you have creditably associated those movements with the survival of your organism. So the way all 3 of us have trained, where to whatever degree we in a civilized way can do, we have challenged ourselves, been challenged, done things that confront us with injury while we're doing this. I think what happens is we teach our reptilian brain these particular movements are the route to surviving these moments. And so the reptilian brain will take over for a true martial artist and say, okay, it's like sort of sorting through the body. Okay, these nerve pathways don't work, but we got to survive. So does these bypasses while we're doing martial movements. And we're able to do those movements because our brain believes only through this will we survive. When we walk out of the ring, most of us sort of let that down and go into our civilized selves. We don't walk like an ape or whatever it is. And then it's our sort of habitual brain that takes over as opposed to survival brain. So I think there is some truth, I think, on that level. In terms of, Yoda, in terms of the sage and all that kind of stuff, I think excellent people have a chance of becoming excellent old people, but most martial artists are just whatever, right? And they get old and they're whatever, plus they're old.
Yeah.
There's a mindset thing too, though, right? Because I think, like, at least the guys that I've met that have the on-off switch, if they go into kind of predator mode, it's just like the body becomes unimportant somehow, and then if you're facing it, you can feel it from the outside, like it's a different thing that's in front of you. And then when they get off the mat, they're not the same.
Yeah.
So when Sonny had a stroke and then he had brain surgery, but they didn't get it all, and they gave him 6 months to die, or to live, and then he sort of died 6 months later. But during that 6 months, he was in hospice, but he would train with us, and I have a distinct memory of him in like little slippers. I call them his bunny slippers. They weren't bunny slippers, but and he's like, all right, let's go. And he wouldn't move very much, right? But he basically took the center of the circle and took a sword, and he's like, all right, see if you can hit me. And it's like, there was no way that I could hit him without dying. Does that make sense? It's like, yeah, sure, I could have just kind of ran into it and, done something, but I couldn't actually get an angle on him to get him at all. And that memory really sticks in my head because the guy was barely moving. So in some sense, he was like the epitome of that Yoda guy that, doesn't really move, but every small thing that he does takes something away from you. It's almost like he's mind reading, that sort of level of skill. So in that sense, that he just had that ability to fight, like being that mindset. And that somehow was different, and you kind of forgot everything, his physical limitations. I wonder if that's related.
I think so. I've seen a lot of elderly people who just deteriorate, and I would say the ones who deteriorate most are the masters of kata, the masters of form. That somehow, unless you have been tested in random stuff as well, as the body deteriorates, essentially you're no longer the dancer you once were, right? The ballet dancer has to retire, so to speak. But if you have trained your nervous system to use your form in the service of managing random forces, I think that will carry over almost to the end of your life.
Do you think that's a kind of a meditation of like being in the moment? I mean, would that be the spiritual aspect of it? Like that ability to be present?
I'm not in the habit of thinking of things like that way. It's just, I know those terms, I'm around those terms a lot, but honestly, my mind doesn't operate that way. But I just know that, there's a very famous sword teacher in Japan who had a habit of saying, I've achieved a level that when I'm doing this school, I can be writing a grocery list in my head. And I thought, oh, that sounds so cool. Bullshit. Because and I thought to myself, you couldn't do it with me. Because I think you can talk about writing a grocery list, this kind of, I've achieved this, spontaneous reaction and all of that. That's when somehow you trust that your opponent won't do something random, right? So I think there is that purity of attention. How's that?
Yes.
That, we didn't get on the mat together, did we, when we met at Sword Squad?
Sadly not.
Yeah. I know we met, and I saw you on the sidelines going,
Yeah, you're just teaching, and I came to see, and then I wanted to come and say hello because we have this sort of weird connection through Lord Asho and Sudong Chen, and I wanted to hear the stories, of course. But yes, but
Yeah.
there was no. Sadly, we did not get to cross weapons or whatever.
Yeah, but I know that because I watched you as well, and I know that were I to engage with you, I would do. It's not even do my best. I better have purity of attention to really pay attention to this human being in front of me, or I would suffer, and maybe I would suffer anyway. I'm not, yeah. But it's so if one refers to that as a meditative state, yeah, sure, but I think there has to be absolutely pure attention, and I think that somebody like Sonny, you describe, he can barely move, but he not only is paying attention to you, and he's not doing this consciously, right? It's the wiring takes over and lets him know, I can only move this much, and paying attention to you, I know if I'm right here, I got you.
Yeah, it's almost one of the questions that I had a long time ago was, it sort of did my head in that something that was basically about killing people could be beautiful. Like I had this real quandary about how do these things go together, because watching him move is beautiful. I mean, it's just like, oh my goodness, look at that. I want to be able to do that. That's amazing. So how is those two things to go together? So the best explanation I've come for it is that not only are you in complete harmony with your own body, so you're completely controlled within your own self, but you are completely in the moment and moving with the other person as though everything is one thing. Does that make sense? So you're, you and gravity and the sword and the space and the time and the other person have a connection, like it is all one thing at this point. So you're not disconnected, and that's what looks beautiful, is because everything is relational, and you've just kind of plugged yourself into this thing that's happening and blending with it in the time. So it's almost like a snake charmer and a snake, or whatever it is that these two things are kind of working together, in this 4-dimensional environment. So yes, I think I agree with you, though perhaps I use different words.
So my experience of this is that if I am engaging in interacting with people lightly, I will wear them out, one after the other, for 3 hours. I can go longer than most of my students with light sparring, and then they'll start whinging, and I'll go to the next one and go to the next one. But if I am engaged in heavy sparring, where it's really severe, I will have it in me to beat the first 3 or 4 people. Like we often do bear pits, one after the other, where whoever is winning stays in the middle, and I can do that for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I start losing it. The level of intensity, I joke with them. I say that the clever thing to do is to do unexpected things 3 or 4 times, in the moment that you they start figuring you out, you go, oh man, I'm an old guy, I need to go sit down. But there's some truth to that, and I find that while in certain circumstances I can I guess act like Yoda, I guess in other circumstances I can feel that there are things that I can no longer do, and it's about the level of intensity that I had. I don't feel bad about that either. I feel quite happy. I feel quite happy to let that aspect go a little bit. So is that similar with you?
No. I mean, there's a lot of things I can't do. It's like that there's this gradual paring away of things that I say, okay, I've taught it, I can't do it anymore. But I never want to be a chair sensei, right? You know, just sort of sitting and pointing. And, you know, when I was young, I used to do. So I don't define myself in my own head as old.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If and it's there's a million people who could defeat me one way or another. It's not that, and that's a low number. But my attitude is, I still got to be improving. As a martial artist, I still got to be improving. So I don't know if I have this sort of fifth level where I would have arrived at something. You know, there's this high rank people call Menkyo Kaiden, the sort of highest rank, and I consider that a driving license. Right? It's the same as, okay, I'm now licensed to get on the road. I haven't arrived at the peak. I've arrived at, that's just my gateway to start working. And so my goal is, I want to keep refining this stuff, improving it till the day I die. And part of that for me, maybe makes me small, is that I still want to be able to defeat people. Maybe it's too important to me, but I still.
Maija, what are your thoughts?
Well, I practice a style. I don't think there's that many teachers that teach sword and really understand it in the same way like Sunny did. I know there's some, but very few. And so it's really hard to find people to play with. And for me, that's how I know what I don't have, is playing with people. So I've looked outside my system somewhat, and I play with HEMA people. You know, I play with Western fencers. You know, I try and play outside, because the people that are my level, we're just a tiny little group, and we all kind of know each other. And because we have a relationship, it's actually hard to push each other, because we're all a bit overly polite in some ways, you know, or maybe we're all just sort of secretly pretending that we're better than the others, and so we don't actually want to find out. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something there that makes us not fight really hard with each other. Yeah. So I have to go outside. But as I age, you play with strangers, and suddenly there's much more risk of injury. Mm-hmm. And so I find that the pool of people that are fun to play with, that aren't going to get their panties in a twist and, you know, get ugly, you know, is not that enormous. And so what I find as I age is I'm just unwilling to risk getting damaged by taking people on. And so I can very consciously see my skills leaving me because I am unwilling to risk. You know, I've become more risk averse as I become older.
Is it that you're not practicing at that level, or is it
I need to fight people that are better than me? I mean, it sounds horrible, doesn't it? But it's like in the style that I do, it's like there's people that are way better than me at different weapons. But in the thing that I do, like a single-handed, you know, short weapon stuff, or it doesn't have to be Filipino style. But if we have no rules, you know, so we're not Western fencing, we're not doing something that has like point sparring or whatever, that has that, you know, sense to it, that's you and me now. I have to have somebody that's actually trying to get me to know what my gaps are. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? But I also need them to behave like a real human being. It's like I'm not actually interested in doing a ring sport that has the rules that I win. You know, it's like I understand that if I get a cut on the hand, that's actually damage that I actually want to avoid. So I want to fight with people that aren't all, you know, I could fight with somebody that doesn't value their life, and that's like fighting somebody that's crazy, which is fine. But that's also a limited field of behavior, because if they're that crazy, what am I doing standing there with a sword? I'd be doing something completely different. I'd have run away or something. Does that make sense? It's like I want to have some sort of semblance of what this was designed for, to be good at it in. Ooh, my English is leaving me.
What is the describe the sparring that you're willing to do with people?
Well, we either use, I'm going to say it in the English way, aluminium blades, or we use padded blades. But if we're playing padded blades, I don't want to practice with somebody that's just taking hits and not caring. I want to have somebody that is behaving as though we have real swords in our hand. And I'm not going to be fighting somebody with a real sword in my hand because I don't trust anybody. You know, I've done a bit of live blade flow with people that I trust, but I don't trust very many people. You know, so, you know, it's like I need to have somebody push my buttons and find my gaps. And there definitely are some people. It's just that I find that I don't necessarily, I can feel like I don't have enough of them to keep me sharp enough. Like double blade, for instance. I have a couple of friends who are really good at double blade, but we don't see each other very often. So my double blade skills are really going downhill because I don't have that interaction where somebody's like, you missed that one, or oops, watch this one. Does that make sense? Because that's how I know that I suck. I need to suck to find the hole, to fix the hole.
Yeah. And Ellis, what is it that when you interact with people sparring, what does it look like? What is it?
And stuff. So a couple like quick terms. So there's a term in Japanese, tadyu shiai. And tadyu shiai is two people from different traditions challenging each other. And the goal is, I want to break your school. I want to take your honor. I want to, you know, so it's on one level, it's not murder, but
it's serious.
It's serious, and the possibility of death could happen, right? And honestly, I have never done a tadyu shiai. The second term is tame shiai, and tamesu means testing shiai. Could use the same weapons. It could be just as dangerous, but the two of us have agreed to cooperate together to explore our strengths and weaknesses. So in a tadyu shiai, I would never try to improve myself. I'd say, okay, what's my strongest technique? Where does she appear to be weakest? How do I take that? Whereas if I'm trying to improve myself, I say, you know, I'm going to try one of those low posture upward cuts and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I remember one guy I sparred with, and we were using what are called fukuro shinai, which is a split bamboo with a leather sheath, pretty stiff. And in one of the traditions I trained, there were always these high feints and then low cut to the ankle. Mm-hmm. And it works great in kata. And so I had to see how it worked. And I gave a beautiful feint. Beautiful. Had him completely, and then I dropped low. And in a panic, he sort of leapt backwards and poked out with the sword, went right in my eyeball, right in the socket. And if it had been just a little bit narrower, I'd be blind. And I realized that with weapons of equal length, never going to do that again, right? So tame shiai gives you the opportunity to test things. And as one of my teachers put it, we're going to try to kill each other, but let's try not to hurt each other in the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of crave. But I also wonder whether it's just an excuse for me not to risk because I'm getting older and I'm drawing in. Well, maybe I'm setting myself up to not do it.
Well, the thing is, the only ultimate test is a fight to the death, right? And
and I'm unwilling to do that. Right? Yeah.
The other way of sparring that I have found, I think of it as sectored sparring. So because, for example, one of the schools I train at Akio, we are really appallingly use power. It doesn't mean crude power. It's a kind of explosive power that if you are in the way of it, it should cut you down. If you are strong enough not to be cut down or agile enough to get out of the way, you're set up for the next thing. But it requires that power. If I'm light, the technique doesn't work. You know, it's like a lot of technique can work in sort of flowy stuff. And, you know, you can collude and say, oh, look at all those great techniques. And then somebody just comes in hard and all of a sudden that flow doesn't work anymore, right? So what we'll do is, let's say we do an kata. So in the middle of a kata, we're going to have three alternatives. And if I'm attacking you, you're going to get one of those three. And so you get to, with absolute spontaneity, pick up in that moment which one of those three is coming at you and counter it. So we would sector off some skills, and then we can go 100%, right? Because it's not like the full pie. It's one slice of the pie, but the point of it goes all the way to the center. So certainly for myself, I found that's a really good way to hone technique in a way that doesn't, where I can have as much intensity as is safely to have without it becoming murderous.
I would also point out that my system is a little bit ass backwards from normal martial arts systems, is that the goal isn't actually winning. The goal is not getting hit. So the goal is always to live and like not get hit. So that's always the focus. So technically everything else happens as a side to that. It's like, oh, they're not stopping because of this. I need to now do that. Or they're really serious, so I really do need to render them incapable of continuing. You know, so there's this idea that there's different games, but the idea is never to vanquish my enemy. The idea is that they're in my way of doing what I want to do, and I need to render them incapable of continuing, or not wanting to continue mentally. Like, it doesn't have to be physical either. So there's that aspect to it too.
And honestly,
I'm not sure if that has a different mindset.
Well, I think that's where ethics is born in a martial art. Rather than it, you know, well, I'm a loving person and I'm going to try to resolve conflict. It's simply acting as you just described is, in terrible situations, is going to minimize the people seeking revenge, right? Because
there's always an after, yes, that you have to manage. Yeah.
And if you gratuitously take my life and I have family, they're more likely to come after, as opposed to you were able to defeat me without unnecessarily hurting me, taking my life, right? So, and to me, that's sort of, that's where I think ethics is born through. It actually makes more sense to survive and at times let your enemy live, so to speak, because they're not in a position to hinder you anymore. That makes a lot of sense to me.
But do you think also that this is technically one of the higher levels or later levels perhaps of fighting, is that the psychological stuff, you can get into war magic, you can get into a whole bunch of weird esoteric stuff, but much more like the anting of the Philippines, which are amulets and things that people wore, but they could also be chants or orazon or something. And if somebody had a reputation and you were challenging this old man and he turned up and he's got like weird tattoos on him and he's doing weird stuff and he's, you know, chanting some weird things, it's like you're probably going to become maybe a little bit nervous and perhaps second guess your choices, because you can always leave before it kicks off. So there's this idea that the better you get, you come with a reputation anyway, and then you have all this added stuff, and now you're psychologically destroying them before anything's happened. I think in Japan is a little bit with the stances too, that, or your presence perhaps, that you develop perhaps over time that can make somebody decide against continuing. Do you think that's a higher level later skill perhaps?
Well, first of all, I think one thing you're describing is very cultural, right? And it's a sort of a dueling context, it sounds like, at least, right? On some level, a one-on-one fight, I'm going to challenge you, that kind of thing.
It could also be street crime, but it's generally, I can see you coming, or I saw you coming. Right. You know, that's really the baseline.
So I think there's one level of, let's use the word magic, which is when I see you act a certain way, the only thing I can think of, it must mean X, Y, or Z, therefore I will. That level, which is, I think, culturally rooted, because, you know, if you transplanted somebody from Brazil into that context with a machete, and he doesn't even know what the old man with the amulet is doing. Right,
it doesn't mean anything.
But there's another level of, let's use the same word, battle magic or something like that, which is universal.
Yeah.
And in a lot of Japanese traditions don't know they used to have this, but you learn it from day one. You learn it in part through your teacher doing that from day one, and your mirror neurons are firing and recognizing it. In Japan, it's called steal the technique. And a lot of people don't get it, probably most. But so Hong Yishang said to me, be careful who you choose as a teacher, because you will be infected by them, right? And yeah, and there's no guarantee how that's going to turn out, right? Su Dong Chen, Lo Dish. But so from day one, you were learning the second type of skill in terms of kamai stance. That my stance is, for example, if I take a certain stance, that should mean this, and maybe I want you to think it means that because it really means something else. So like the first, let's say you take a high stance. Well, on an inside level, I can be in a low stance, and what that's reflected as is you receive that as, oh, he's really trying to overwhelm me, but I feel this weakness, and so I'm going to move in. And the next level of the game is I'm giving you that sense that I'm weak, so you will move in. You know, there's all those kind of levels.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what's interesting is, and I'd say 90% of what Japanese martial arts don't even know they had that anymore. But of the ones that are true intact schools, it's present, and most people don't pick it up because nobody's going to sit down and tell you. The teacher's going to recognize that you're picking it up and then want to teach you because you're paying attention.
What do you think, Mike? I'm curious what your experience of both Japanese and in HEMA too, because HEMA's from all books, so you don't have any direct transmission. But there's got to have been part of that too.
Oh yeah, when I listen to Ellis explaining things, I think Ellis, your experiences are much more right out of Japan than mine have been. I think when I was interacting with Mr. Oshima, it was his effort to teach a bunch of Americans how to fight, and at the same time, I think that the way that he taught was very much filled with an energy. I would refer to what you're talking about as a deadly intent, having a sense of seriousness about what's going on. And portraying that, and definitely something along those lines passed from him to his seniors and to me. It's an aspect of practice, I think, to if you're doing it well, to try to do it with serious, realistic intent. So it relates to me in that way.
You can't try to do it though, can you? You either have it or you don't, which I think is the interesting part.
Well, I think what Ellis said about in being infected by your teacher related to me. It infuses into you if you're in the environment that encourages that. And if the teacher knows, if that's a goal, like the simple practice of one attack, the way a lot of karate groups do one attack is as a choreographed effort. So I punch at you in a certain designated place, and you block in a certain designated way, and there's no sense of a real fight in that. But if you change the rule set a bit and make it, I am going to hit you, and I'm really going to try to hit you, and I'm going to put everything into it, and you better get out of the way, because I'll apologize only for not doing my best. And so years of having that happen infuses a quality of seriousness in your practice. I think you can see it reflected in different groups. If somebody doesn't do that, then it's more of a play. But at the same time, there's other things that I don't know if you have to have a brute, like one way to get that is to really hit, control it in some ways, or have the threat of really hitting. Another way to do that is to continually focus on just the attitude. I don't think you need to do super intense practices all the time to obtain that same energy. If you know what I mean.
I agree with you there. I've sometimes had a student who is afraid if they put too much energy in, they're going to injure their partner, and particularly with weapons. Yeah. Or somebody's injured and they can't go full speed, full force. And I say, I don't care if you go slow, but I don't care how slow you're going, you have to have the same intensity. I can be moving like this, and I'm trying to split your skull in slow motion. The energy doesn't change. Yeah. One other sort of brief point is, a couple of years ago, I went up to VIS, the Vancouver International, the HEMA thing, and I co-taught a workshop on close combat with a blade with Marco Quarta, and it was a lovely experience two of us had. And there was one young woman student. She was fantastic. She loves grappling, and she volunteers for the Vancouver Police Force for their Red Man training. Because it's very hard to have. You practice subduing and arresting people. It's almost always guys, and there's a whole psychological thing dealing with a woman who is full force out fighting you, and most cops don't have a chance to practice it. And there's this young woman is, and she's just so intense in her interest. And so she started asking me about some esoteric stuff she'd heard, and I started talking about what's called Tengusho. So Tengusho is it's a level of teaching where you're trying to deliberately get yourself possessed by sort of earth elementals, Japanese earth elementals. But the idea is you have to be strong enough that you accept full possession, and then you ride that which is possessing you. Right? It's like inviting a tiger inside you and then sitting on its back. And yet it operates your limbs at that point forward. So you have this kind of spontaneity. It doesn't come from your own self. It comes from somewhere else. It's really very remarkable. And the thing is, if you pursue this kind of thing, which is old shamanistic, its roots are in old shamanistic practice, you risk a lot. You risk psychological damage. You risk all sorts of things. And so I was explaining this, and Marco is standing off to the side with his jaw like, and he said, that is exactly what we have in the stiletto tradition, where we're trying to be possessed by demons, and you risk your soul. And this teaching exists. It's the same. So this talk about spiritual. Yeah. But there is this level which, beyond this level of hacking your own nervous system, it's sort of whatever way you explain it, it's like inviting something other into your operating system and somehow making use of it when it makes use of you. And I think that any martial art that taps back into roots, into shamanistic culture, will have something similar, even though most of that has been lost in modern day, the modern day world.
This is a good segue to my next question. So my next direction I want to go with this is, what's your relationship to young people like now? By young people, I mean people who are in their 20s and 30s, maybe 40s, but really the people that are getting going, getting started. And then what are you likely to teach them at this point? And what is your teaching experience like now compared to what it might have been before? So there's kind of two facets. What's your relationship with young people, and how are you teaching them and other people now?
All right. I only teach really one-on-ones. I don't teach really groups. And the people that come to train with me, because what I do is kind of weird, tend not to be that young. My Bagua class, I have quite a lot of younger people, not young, but late 20s, that sort of age group. But the Eskrima, I don't take anybody under 21 anyway to do anything with swords. But I don't get that, very young students. If I do a seminar, there'll be obviously an age range of people. That's slightly different, I think, because it's not a long-term thing. Mostly my job at seminars is just to inspire people to keep going. That's what I want to expand people's imagination, that they're curious enough to want to keep practicing. Because I think if you keep practicing, then eventually you'll get better. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just want to sort of make people go, oh, I never thought about that. That's great. Or how does that work? Or I want to do that. Right. So that I feel like is my job. But one-on-one, when I'm teaching back here, I don't know. I think age is a very weird thing. Obviously, culture has really changed, so that the way I teach is slightly different. People, what they want out of teaching is slightly different, but I don't know if it's necessarily just age. It's just zeitgeist related, particularly. I think. I don't know how they see me, which I'm always curious about. I think I feel mildly self-conscious because I don't know what I'd look like to other people. Like, am I older now? I guess I am older. I guess I'm much older, right? So I'm an old person now, but I don't feel like it. So it just feels very disconnected to me. So I don't think I have a very good answer for you, I'm afraid.
Okay. Ellis, what do you think?
So there's about 4 answers in one here, because different things that I teach have gone differently. So in Tenshin Bukoryu, which is a school that really focuses on the naginata. And by the way, my teacher, going back to World War II, she was caught in the Tokyo firestorm and went to the dojo for practice and was walking down the street seeing roasted bodies. The dojo was completely incinerated. And so she walked about 20 miles outside of Tokyo to live out the next section of the war with some distant family. So that was the experience that she had in World War II and all that. Lovely, graceful person she was. So I have a couple groups in Europe that I am, and they're in their 40s, 30s, one in their 20s, and I'm just basically, I teach them, they learn, and the school goes on in the next generation. Arakiryu, I've already passed on that tradition to a group in Greece. Has some wonderful people there. And I thought that was it with Arakiryu, but of recent years, some people really wanted to learn, but didn't want to give me 15 years of unremitting toil. And so I developed a model. I gave it the name Tai-Kyoku Arakiryu, which is sort of an inside joke because Tai-Kyoku means Tai Chi with different character, but the character I use means great themes. And what it is I work with an established group of martial artists who've got their own thing. So, for example, there's a group in Palos Verdes who were BJJ practitioners, pretty high level. They want a portion of Arakiryu, and so I slice out a portion, and I go down occasionally. I teach them without holding anything back. That module could be all they take, or they could say, give me another module. And so there's not the pressure that, God, there's the whole weight of this tradition. I just give information. This has really changed my relationship in terms of working with younger people because it's a much more collaborative process, right? Any respect I get, I have to earn. We do minimal dojo etiquette. We practice in street clothes. It's very informal. I'm on a first name basis with everybody. They're professionals at what they do. And I think that's closer to my ideal of martial arts than the sort of traditional stuff, which can sometimes border on live action role play if you're not careful. But
that
then,
resonates with me too. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, but yeah, I'm teaching mostly groups that do other things, and then I have this thing that kind of slots in, like it's a piece that's missing, perhaps, from what they have.
yes, yes, yes.
There's a couple of things that you guys have said that seem to relate to this. One is this idea of imparting a body of knowledge, like what you have to teach is fine. I mean, it is an infinite that you can learn, perhaps, but in terms of what you have ready to pass on to somebody else that's coherent, it's a kind of a slightly modified over time package of information. And I've experienced that if I have students for, I have been teaching HEMA sword fighting for 10 years. Prior to that, I started teaching in 1976, and I haven't stopped. So I've been teaching people who are abject beginners to people who have been practicing with me for 15 years. And what I think is something similar, that there at some point, I've given you everything you have that I can give you. The only thing that I could do in addition to that is be learning on my own, and when I figure out something, share it with you. But now it's up to you to take that and become something with it. And when I was teaching karate, that relationship wasn't as apparent. I was younger, and there's a different structure in a karate group that requires this continual relationship of hierarchy. And when I started teaching sword fighting, I kind of rebelled against that. I did not want to do that. And so I built a different relationship with my students, which is more like what you guys are doing. The only difference is that I was still doing, up until this year, I've still been teaching basic classes. So that's a difference, change for me, as I decided when I turned 70 that I was going to retire from that kind of teaching and just not do it anymore. In exchange for doing one-on-ones and maybe workshops and writing a little bit and doing stuff like this. And anyway, so my relationship with young people has shifted a bit. I don't have the energy. I don't have the energy to teach somebody who's just beginning, who is going to be working through issues that have to do with their own mentality as they develop. That's part of martial arts practice. But after a certain period of, done that over and over and over again, and it's somebody else's job to do that now. I'm more interested in the dance that you have with individuals when there's somebody who's interested in the same thing you're interested in.
Yeah, don't you find, Mike, that somebody, it's somebody comes to you and says, I'm missing this thing, and I saw this, and I think you can help me. Like there's much more kind of the student comes to you further than you have to sort of make all the distance. Sorry, Ellis, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, and like a lot of this, I don't know if this has always been the case. I just can't tell, or if it's a function of the era that we live in. But people seem to me to be very weak in their ability to commit or to follow. Their word does not mean as much as I want it to. So if somebody says they're going to be here, I want them to be here. I want that to mean something, and people don't. They just don't. When they're starting out, they do not have that discipline. And I don't want to. I'm not feeling cynical about this. I just think it's a quality of youth that people don't know what they want until they do, and then they can commit. And it can take years at this point in time for people to figure that out. And there's a certain kind of training that you can give people that helps them do that kind of thing. But it's not what I want to do anymore.
A couple of things came to my mind. The first is I've never identified myself as a martial arts teacher. And if I did, the endless cycle of new students, et cetera, would be my job, right? A job without end. I regarded myself as somebody who does martial arts and has an obligation to pass it on. But like once I've passed it on, I don't owe passing it on to anybody. Although my 7-year-old grandson and I are going to the dojo every day right now, and he attacks me with a sword, and I don't hit him. But anyway, and he says, "Can I be your last student?" So that's the one thing. I think that if one feels a responsibility that one has been given this blessing, this knowledge, and that responsibility incurs passing it on. Once passed on, I don't feel like I've got to do it again and again and again. Part of the challenge, an interesting challenge for me though, is if I've passed it on, if I've liberated someone, I've had this happen. I look at what they're doing and I'm going, But, it's like I need to shut up, right? Yeah. It's like, do I tell my children how to raise their kids, right? Yeah, I got to shut up, right? Even if I go, oh, man. The one last point I wanted to make regarding young people. Friend of mine named Josh Gold, who is the successor to Stanley Pranin, who ran the martial arts journal, Aikido Journal. And Josh took that over, and he developed a brilliant idea and has been using me as a kind of mentor as a program. It's called Budo Accelerator. And what it is using martial arts to teach young people leadership skills. I think it's utterly brilliant because usually it's like teaching how to have calm your ADHD down or teach them discipline. Leadership, and he puts the word out so the kids who come in want to learn about leadership. And so there are high school kids or college kids. We've got both. So far, it's been in Josh's Aikido dojo and a couple of Aikido dojos, but the goal is to actually develop a program that could be integrated in any martial art where there are young people involved. And if one is going to be part of this program, there's a background check because you're making access to young people and all of that. And one of the goals is it's not leadership for X, because I have seen, like, for example, there was a women's Aikido summer camp for abortion rights. And whatever you think about abortion rights, that's not the issue for me. I think it's a bastardization of martial arts to get a group of young people together, a captive audience, and you've got the charisma of a teacher, and now I'm going to impregnate you with my, bad choice of words, with my ideology. So, when we started this program, a couple of the board of directors were, sort of offhand, like, putting out their ideas on whatever the issue of the day was. And I was saying, no, you have to have a kid coming in and whatever your thoughts on this. And he's wearing a MAGA hat and he says, I'm hoping to use this leadership to develop a young group of cadre to really support Donald Trump. And our attitude should be, we will help you with that because we trust you as a young person, that if we provide you with leadership skills, which include ethical behavior, you'll do what is best with that. Yeah. Or Joe Biden or whatever. So anyway, working with a lot of young people right now, mostly by Zoom. But, what we do is we'll take a principle like kamai, which is stance in Japanese. And we'll talk about how do you stand up in a group? How do you project your values through your stance? And I'll talk about that for a bit. And then reflect on that in the martial art they're training. Where does stance factor into your training? How about if you adjust your stance? You're kind of scared of a person. Notice how you stand when you're scared. Change from the outside in, not the inside out. Change your stance and see what happens next. So it's been a really exciting thing to participate in, that the kids are really genuinely training in a martial arts school, and it's linking this to something that there is far too little of among young people today, which is being a leader.
This is one of the reasons why I persisted in teaching regular classes for so long, because as you both probably know, I really place a premium on the idea of martial arts as a character development tool, and something that just by its nature provides opportunities for people to grow. Yeah. So, okay, another change of topic here. So we probably will, I'm thinking we're going to finish up in about 15 minutes. Is that good for you guys?
Sure.
The next question is another multifaceted one. How much does your health affect your practice? And does it bug you to get older? What's your daily practice like for you?
Yes, it bothers me getting older. It's weird. All the cliches are true. I, you know, I don't think I can actually complain because I could put more work into maintaining certain things. I mean, injuries, you get injuries and there's no way around it, right? It's like the arthritis in my toes because I rolled on them and broke one of them is just going to be there, right? So it's not like I'm going to fix that. And the arthritis and tendonitis I have in my hands is just there now. And whatever it is I've got going on in my shoulder is just there now. But I think you can actually put as much work in as you want to maintain, you can maintain stuff for longer. But the fight for me at my age is I don't need to, right? So there's part of it where I want to do the stuff that I enjoy, but there's that constant fight where it's like, yeah, it was good. And, I'm slowing down now and, I could do it, but I don't need to. So how much effort to put into being able to do what I could do before. And, and I guess because what I teach is so weird. I mean, one, it's sword, so there's no need for any power necessarily. I can fight, with edged weapons with zero power necessary. Like Sonny, I could stand in the middle of it with my bunny slippers on and not really move and still be able to do stuff, right? It's not, there's no physical prowess necessary, particularly. And I can definitely improve my understanding of strategy in people and reading people, writing people, like doing all that stuff. I don't think that it ever sort of ends on that level. So I think it's an interesting thing that you invited me on today, because it's one of the questions I too have is like, how much do I physically still want to be able to do? How much does it bother me that I can't anymore, or I'm sort of losing it a little bit? And how much can I just transfer that into being even older and more treacherous?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's sort of that I can always get better at. So I can actually, improve in certain directions. Though technically I could improve physically too, but then I'd have to put a lot more work into it. And how much do I want to? It's a really tough call. I don't know. I mean, I'm teaching at the Immersion Lab seminar in November. So the theme is speed. And I think speed is meaningless. It's all timing. But regardless, I can have great timing at 90, and I don't really care how fast you are if you miss me, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, if I can manage the fight in such a way that I'm that good at 90 and I don't need anything really physical and still beat you, then I think I really learned something. But that is balanced out with that feeling of not having that same physicality, and my ankle gets turned or my knee hurts, or I put my back out much easier, or you know what I mean? Like that sort of, all those edges of your range that draw in as you get older. Yeah, it's kind of bothersome, but yeah. I would very much like to know from two of you, it's that how much physical training, do you put in, should you put in? Do you, I mean, what I mean? Like, I don't think there's a right answer, but I'm sort of curious.
That's part of this question is like, okay, so a precept or an adage that I have is that the trick of this era of your life is to not to, as you suffer diminishment, how to not suffer diminishment of your spirit, whatever that means. But there's something about, even though I have disadvantages now, even though I am not at what might have been my peak physically when I was when I was younger. I don't need to give up, and I can be persistent. But I also don't want to do things the way I used to. I don't feel like it's healthy for me to practice exactly the same way that I did when I was 40. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't, the energy vibe that I get from doing that is more of a dragging me down into, if I practiced like I did when I was 40, my recovery wouldn't be enough for me to
Right.
continue. And I would keep diminishing myself until I would be just laying on the ground. So yes, practice. Yes, I took an oath when I was a teenager that I was going to see what it was like to practice martial arts for my entire life. And I still am holding myself to that oath. But how I'm practicing now is quite different than it used to be. So Ellis, what are your thoughts on this? I can go into detail, but I'd like to hear what Ellis has to say.
First thing is this getting old thing. I walked past a mirror this morning and I said, Jesus Christ, I look like an old man in a bathrobe. And my wife said, you are an old man in a bathrobe. So, and I truly don't think old. I think poor function. When I was 16 and I really badly sprained my knee and I was a basketball player and now I'm on the bench sitting watching and my knee is taped up, I didn't feel old. I just felt lame, right? So now I have these various limitations and they hurt or they limit me, but I don't associate with the concept of oldness until I look in the mirror. But until recently, if you were to ask my training, it would be, when my guys come over or I visit somebody, I train the martial art with somebody else. Otherwise, I was doing approximately, on average, an hour and a half a day of solo training. Most of it was cultivation of what some people call internal strength, very specific exercises, which gave me a new lease on life. If I hadn't started that, my peak as a martial artist would have been about 45, 50 years old. And I basically changed the mechanics of my movement, and that's given me this truly a new lease on life. And I even had an objective measure of that. It was one year I was going over to Greece, and literally the day before I was going to get on a plane, I got an umbilical hernia. So I quickly went to an ER and asked, so what's up? What do I do? And they said, well, if the tear is under 1.5 inches, we'll just sew it up. If it's over 1.5 inches, we have to put mesh in. And if you put mesh in, you've got this place where you no longer can properly flex your abdomen. It's literally, and there's all kinds of problems that happen with that. So I went to Greece, and the best way I can put it is I decoupled my dantian. I did all the movements without the center involved. And what I found was using the skill I had without dantian involvement, I was just a whisker at that point better than my students. I was almost getting hurt over and over again. Went back, thankfully was able to get sewed up, came back 6 months later, and all of a sudden I was much better, right? So that particular training has been wonderful for me. What's happened with what I mentioned at the beginning with this back issue, which has really just gotten bad recently, is I'm running through, aside from going to PT, learning specific exercises, I'm running through every exercise and movement I have, and the ones that hurt, I have to believe are now damaging because of the particular condition I have, so I'm eliminating them. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to make a new training regimen of the things that are nourishing for me. And I believe that if I'm going to ward off surgery, which I really would like to do, I'm going to have a very specific training regimen that I want to somehow continue training the things I love, the martial arts that I love, but now it's very specific about, how I don't cripple myself.
I think for me, I want to stay creative, and I think you can actually use aging or incapacity or whatever it is, limitations as a inspiration, like you're using. I mean, that's pretty cool. You're just like, all right, well, that's gone. So how do I work around that? And I think that can actually keep you quite connected to what you're doing, because now you're investigating in a sense. I mean, a lot of the internal arts are the same way, is that you're just investigating how things are and how things move and what things feel like. And is it different on the left and the right? Oh, is it? Can I make something different there, or can I change that? Right. So it's a sort of a scientific inquiry in a sense. So that creativity, I kind of like that. If you can keep hold of that and not get afraid that you'll never get back what you had, for me, those are the two sides of it: the scientific curiosity and the, oh no, this is never going to heal this time.
Yeah.
Want to try and avoid the fear one and keep the science one,
Yeah. I'm constantly doing something similar. I constantly explore mostly where I have been going with my personal practice is lots of range of motion movements. Kind of became a fan of the natural movement idea of basically being able to do things you did when you were younger. And I kind of explore that in a way that is pretty. It doesn't put me at risk. And I keep my I do physical things, weightlifting a little bit, and doing things like calisthenics and pull-ups and those sorts of things. And in terms of my martial practice, once a week, I do stuff on my own, and once a week on Sunday mornings, I retired from teaching regular classes this year, and I'm go and meet with my students on Sunday, and we just hang out and practice, and it's pretty laid back. And I'll spar with whoever wants to spar with me, but I usually don't put on gear, and I don't feel like wrestling anymore. Wrestling people can make mistakes, and you can end up being hurt.
Yeah.
Them, and so I avoid that. Well, I do standing grappling, but not on the ground. It's too many things pop off and make noises when I do that. But I find getting older to be fascinating. It there's a part of me, as you say, Ellis, that still feels like I'm 16, but most of me feels like, oh, I'm in a different era, and wow, look at how my perspective has changed. I am see things with a longer view than I used to, and that's growing as I go through it. I'm more patient. I'm less prone to getting angry at knuckleheads, although I still acknowledge that knuckleheads exist. And I generally feel pretty happy most of the time. And that was I have for our final question for tonight. My question is two again. Are you happy? And what should we all be aiming for?
I'm not taking that one first. You have to go first with that one, Ellis.
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm actually really depressed, and I was wondering.
Kind of a baited question, I guess.
I'm a happy human. I am. I think do this right, I got another 30 years, which hopefully will be a lot more novels written, and a lot more doing the things I want. So all that's good. What was the second part?
What should we all be aiming for?
Honestly, I wouldn't have a clue, because I don't think of we all. I really don't.
How about you then?
Say what? What am I aiming for?
How about you then?
I just want to be a mensch. You know, it's a Yiddish word for anybody who ends up listening. I just want to be a decent human being who, but not sort of in my own bubble. You know, when I make contact with people, I not only do decent things, but I have decent influence in the circle that I touch, right? Whatever that is.
Yeah. Thanks. How about you, Maija?
I'm generally very contented, but I worry that I'm not quite sure if that's the the European Protestant part, that you never think like, is that enough? Am I, it's very difficult for me to know if I'm just being lazy or if I'm actually content and sufficient. So I often sit on that little thing, and I think external influences are the best things to teach you that you get a perspective that's not just you in your head deciding. So on one level, I'm very, very content. It's like you get to do what you do, and it's your choice, and however much you put in doesn't really matter ultimately. It's what you did. It's that was it. I feel an obligation to try and keep Sonny's teaching alive, and at least share all the parts that I know. So obviously I've written the 2 books. I've got one more that's at the editors right now. I'm going to try and give all my stuff as an archive to the immersion labs to keep. But I've realized that my role is only this big, right? It's like I can't actually be all the things I necessarily wanted, but maybe that's enough. So yeah, so I'm happy, but I guess I definitely sit on that. I don't know yet. Is it me? Am I lazy? Should I do more? Is this enough? I don't know. So, but perhaps not knowing is okay. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe that is actually the spur to keep finding out, if that makes sense. But I don't think I have anywhere where I'm going necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't know what the point is. I don't think there actually is one. So we just all get to do what we do, and then we not here anymore.
Yeah, I think and my answer to this is that I I also figure that I would like to be around 30 years from now, and so we have to probably need to do this again in 30 years, but about this particular topic. But uh, learning how, like, I don't know. I think there's a lot to learn. I think there's humility. There's letting go of being the one who is guiding things uh, or has opinions in favor of being the one who watches, and then
I like
being
that.
around for people who maybe have a question and only an old person could answer it. I don't know. I don't know if I qualify yet for that, but perhaps for some people. And there's a sense of, these people who the old lady that sits on the porch rocking a chair watching, and I used to think as a kid, I used to think they were kind of useless, but now I see her differently. I see her as someone who's seeing far more than I ever did. And because I can see how much more I see now compared to what I did before. Um, and so I think there is a whole pile of skills that exist at this era that are yet for us all to discover. And that is part of why we're here. Life's a mystery, and it will continue to be one until we die. And so my last thing I'll say before we hang up is a Taoist poem that when I first started doing martial arts, I found this little tiny book of Kung Fu sayings. It was this big, and I loved that book. I read it and read it and read it. I memorized a lot of things out of it. And then I gave it to somebody and never got it back. And I have to this day never been able to find it so I could give it to somebody else. But the poem is it's just a little saying. In the radiance of the setting sun, people either give thanks or or clamor and bewail the approach of old age. sing and give thanks. That's it. In the radiance of the setting sun, men either sing and give thanks or clamor and bewail the approach of old age. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at. And thank you so much for both of you for joining me on this. Really appreciate it. This first podcast is likely to be a little bit rough around the edges as I try to figure out how to do it all. But I will promise that I'll get it done, and I'll put it up on my YouTube channel and let you guys see it. And if you're interested,
we should do this again. I suspect that all three of us could talk for ages about anything.
I think that would be fun. So I'm game, and I'm going to be trying to do this as part of my new regime for supporting practice as I get older. So anyway, do you have any last thing you'd like to say before we hang it up?
I just want to say thanks to Ellis. It's really nice to hang out with you, as it were, even if it is virtually. Very much enjoyed your company.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And
yeah, I wish I could quote the whole poem myself, but there was this poem. It's from Spain, the Golden Age of Spain, and the last line is an older Jewish man who had become a warrior for the whichever of the small Islamic states that was in Iberia at the time. And the last line was, "Even wounded lions still know how to roar." So
perfect. And here we all are. So
yes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.